Would you believe me if I told you that one football game literally started a war between two countries? Or that there was another football game where a lightning strike killed an entire team? These are the craziest football matches of all time. Starting off with the time this club owner got so angry, he literally invaded the pitch with a loaded gun in his hands. Greek football is known to get heated, especially when the country's top teams are involved. And owners storming onto the pitch is nothing new. Just ask Premier League fans about Nottingham Forest's Greek owner. But one of his rivals in the Greek Super League took things way too far in 2018 when PAOK Salonika were battling it out against fierce rivals AEK Athens in a clash that could decide the title race and give PAOK their first Greek title in 30 years. Things were already pretty nuts that season as PAOK just had a 3-point deduction revoked following an earlier incident involving fans throwing toilet paper at the head coach of Olympiacos. And with that deduction revoked, PAOK could top the table by beating AEK. And they thought they had done just that when they scored a goal from a corner in the last minute to go 1-0 up. But after AEK Athens players complained, the referee ruled out the goal for offside. This led PAOK's owner Ivan Savidis to storm the pitch to argue with the ref, but the real shock came when it was discovered that Savidis was carrying a handgun. And even in Greek football, storming the pitch with a gun is going a step too far. The entire league was suspended, and in the end, PAOK and its owner were heavily punished, including a points deduction and a 3-year ban for the owner. And the irony of it all was that this court ruling led the club's players to claim the league title was stolen from them. But that's not the only crazy match involving referees, as this next one saw one of the worst refereeing performances in history for something football had never seen before. It was an African Nations League match in 2021, and Zambian referee Johnny Sikazwe was in charge of Mali's match with Tunisia when he blew for full time with just 85 minutes on the clock. Clearly, he was desperate to go home, but of course, ending a game on 85 minutes is ridiculous, as everyone in the world could see how much time had been played. I mean, it was literally displayed on the screen above his head. But if there was something wrong with the referee's watch, he clearly didn't try to get it fixed, as a few minutes later, he made the same error, blowing for full time on 89 minutes, despite the game having 2 long VAR delays. So, understandably, Tunisia were absolutely fuming with the referee, as they were losing 1-0 at the time. So, after the game, when players were getting their ice baths, Mali's coach was doing a press conference when CAF officials stormed in and said the final 3 minutes of the game would have to be played. Mali's players put their kits back on and returned to the pitch, but Tunisia were so angry at the referee that they refused to return to the game, so just like that, Mali were declared the winners. But fans of this next game would have wished that the referee ended the game early, as this game shows what can happen when tournament rules aren't properly thought out. In the 1982 World Cup, West Germany and Austria played one of the most boring games of football ever. Seriously, it was a match so bad that it was reported in the crime section of the newspaper. At the time, FIFA didn't require the final matches of the World Cup group stage to be played at the same time, and that led to situations where the team that played last knew exactly what they had to do to qualify. So, when Algeria stunned the world by beating World Cup champions West Germany in their opening game, the Germans needed to win their final game or they would be eliminated. But luckily for West Germany, they were playing Austria, who were top of the group and had a strong goal difference, so could qualify for the next round even if they lost 1-0. So, when West Germany took an early lead, even the world's worst football gamblers could have predicted what would happen next, as with a 1-0 scoreline suiting both sides, each team passed the ball around their own half, nobody really tried to make any tackles, and players took shots so bad you'd think Darwin Núñez was playing. The performance was so dreadful that at one point, the commentator even refused to commentate anymore, and fans were absolutely disgusted, so they labeled the game the Disgrace of Gijón. FIFA changed its rules to prevent the same thing happening again, but this wouldn't be the last time that a tournament's rules turned a game into an absolute disgrace. But before that, this next game saw Arsenal play a home match at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But that's not even the crazy part of this story, as following the end of the Second World War in 1945, Russian side Dynamo Moscow toured England, attracting huge interest as fans had been unable to watch any live football for years due to the war, and as Arsenal's ground had been been commandeered for the war effort, the game had to take place at Spurs Stadium, and this was one of those first matches that fans could have seen as the English League was yet to restart. But those fans wouldn't see much of the match against Arsenal, as White Hart Lane was blanketed in thick fog. And this was a time when London's fog was infamous, becoming so thick it was referred to as a pea souper. So visibility was practically zero. But as Dynamo Moscow had traveled such a long way to play the game, and because 50,000 fans were already in the stadium desperate to see any kind of football, even if they could only see the action on the wing right next to them, the game wasn't called off. And as the referee could barely see what was going on, both sides bent the rules quite a lot, from off-the-ball punches and elbows to late tackles, and at one point, Dynamo stuck an extra player onto the pitch until the referee counted all the players to find out the Russians had been playing with 12 men. But Arsenal also tried the same trick after one player got sent off and simply sneaked back onto the pitch to rejoin the action. And with the offside rule being impossible to enforce, there was controversy over several of the goals as Dynamo won the match 4-3, meaning even Arsenal became Spursy when playing home games at White Hart Lane. But this next game has been described as one of the strangest games ever played, and that's because of a very odd rule. The 1994 Caribbean Cup rather bizarrely had decided that if a team scored a goal in extra time, it would not only win the match, but it would count as 2 goals. This meant that scoring in extra time was, for no particular reason, worth more than scoring in normal time. And this really dumb rule led to a farcical situation when Grenada faced Barbados in their final group stage game, with Barbados needing to beat Grenada by 2 goals in order to reach the next round. And Barbados looked on track to do just that when they went 2-0 up, but when Grenada scored in the 83rd minute, Barbados needed to score another goal. But as the clock ticked down to the final few minutes, Barbados decided they needed more time, so they deliberately scored an own goal, tying the game at 2-2, which would force extra time and give them a chance to score a golden goal that's worth double. But for Grenada, they could still qualify if they scored a goal in normal time in either net, as a 3-2 loss would be enough for them to qualify. So Grenada then tried to score an own goal of their own, with Barbados frantically trying to stop Grenada from scoring at either end of the pitch for the final 3 minutes of the game. But Barbados succeeded and forced extra time, where they then scored that golden goal to win the game 4-2 and go through to the next round, while Grenada's head coach blasted the golden goal rule, saying the person who came up with these rules must be a candidate for the madhouse, despite his team benefiting from the ludicrous rule in a previous match. But if you think that was bonkers, would you believe me if I told you that there was once a football game that literally stopped a war? You see, in 1967, Nigeria was in the midst of a civil war as the region of Biafra tried to form a breakaway state. But there was a brief break in the 3 years of civil war as the soldiers put down their guns to see one of the footballer's greatest ever players. Pelé is probably the most legendary footballer ever, the face of the beautiful game who made Brazil's yellow and blue kit iconic. And if you think the popularity of Messi and Ronaldo is insane, then Pelé's popularity was on a whole other level. Amid his global popularity, his club Santos wanted to profit as much as possible, so they embarked on a huge world tour, and not the kind of world tour that just goes to Europe and Japan. No. This was a proper world tour which visited several African countries, including Nigeria. But Santos couldn't play on a battlefield, so the two sides fighting in Nigeria agreed on a 48-hour ceasefire so that the friendly match between Santos and the Nigerian national team could take place, and military officers from both sides worked side by side to provide security for the match in Lagos, as Pelé scored twice in the match, which finished as a 2-2 draw. But shortly after Pelé and Santos left, the fighting resumed, so maybe it didn't quite end the war, but at least it paused the fighting for a few days. But if you thought that was crazy, the next story is even crazier because it is one of football's biggest tragedies. You see, lightning strikes are a rare occurrence on football pitches, as they usually strike taller objects nearby, such as trees or Peter Crouch. But they have caused deaths on the football pitch over the years, and in the autumn of 1998, several lightning strikes injured footballers in South Africa, though none of those strikes were quite as unusual as this incident a few days later in the Democratic Republic of Congo between local semi-professional sides Basanga and Benetashadi. As with the game tied at 1-1 amid stormy conditions, a huge bolt of lightning struck the pitch, and this lightning strike killed all 11 players on one team and injured 30 spectators. But somehow, the other team was left completely unscathed. and that bizarre situation led many to think that witchcraft was behind the lightning strike, as it seemed improbable that one team would be completely wiped out while the other team was unharmed. And the more superstitious supporters started claiming that the Basanga team had used witchcraft or black magic to kill their opponents. But it's more likely that the type of boots worn by the two teams was behind their different fates, as the Basanga team all wore boots with plastic studs, while the Benetashadi team's boots all had metal studs which conducted electricity, meaning this disaster was truly just a stroke of bad luck. But usually when we speak about bad luck, we're referring to something like an own goal. But would you believe me if I told you there was a football game with over 100 own goals scored? That's exactly what happened in Madagascar in what would end up being the highest scoring football match in the Guinness Book of Records. You see, Madagascan side Stade Olympique Le Mien were not happy with refereeing decisions that had gone against them in a crucial playoff tournament match where they'd drawn 3-3 due to what they claimed was a really dodgy last-minute penalty, and that result gave their arch-rivals AS Adema the Madagascar championship. So, when the Mirna faced Adema in the next game, it was effectively a meaningless game. But rather than congratulate their opponents or give them a guard of honor to mark their rival's championship win, Le Mirna planned a protest. Every time they had the kickoff in their match against Adema, Le Mirna's players just kicked the ball into their own goal, and while doing this once or twice or even 10 times might be enough to prove their point, Le Mirna went much further, leaving their opponents, fans, and everyone else baffled as they notched up a total of 149 own goals for the match to finish 149-0, the biggest scoreline in football history, breaking the previous record of 36-0 set in Scotland more than 100 years earlier. But fans weren't impressed by the Madagascan side's record-breaking feat and demanded refunds, and the Madagascar FA suspended Le Mirna's head coach for 3 years and handed out suspensions to several players, including the national team captain, and presumably their goalkeeper didn't get his clean sheet bonus. The team was disbanded a few years later. But now, for what is probably the craziest football match on this entire list, this football match literally started a 100-hour war between two countries. You see, international incidents happen far too often in national team matches, and there are several countries that are banned from playing each other due to the problems those games can cause. But one match went far beyond that and actually started a war. Tensions were already high between Honduras and El Salvador, as each country blamed the other for domestic problems caused by inequality and land shortages, with Honduras angry at the number of migrants from El Salvador and forced those migrants to return home, exacerbating problems there. So, tensions were high when the two countries met in a World Cup qualifier, and in the first leg, Honduras fans harassed the El Salvador team all night before the game, and Honduras won, causing El Salvador fans to reportedly set fire to the stadium. And in the return leg, El Salvador flew a dirty rag instead of Honduras's flag, and their 3-0 win caused anti-El Salvador riots across Honduras, so the two countries had to play a third match to decide the winner, and that match was to be played in Mexico. But ahead of the game, El Salvador suspended diplomatic ties, saying Honduras riots after the previous match had forced thousands of El Salvadorans to flee the country and accusing Honduras of genocide. And in that match in Mexico, the score was 2-2 in extra time when Pipo Rodriguez scored a late winner for El Salvador. But tensions between the countries were now so high that a few days later, the two countries were at war, bombing each other's airfields and sending troops across the border. And while the war only lasted for 100 hours, more than 3,000 people were killed, and the long-term consequences were even more devastating and led to a civil war. Back on the pitch, though, El Salvador would go on to qualify for the 1970 World Cup, where they finished bottom of their group, losing all 3 group stage games.